A friendly hello from Germany to this Focus Labs webinar on SAP authorizations, and a particular topic in authorizations is access violations. My name is Jens Kettler, and we have a guest today, an expert in the field of SAP authorizations. It's Marcel Huskens from the Netherlands. Welcome, Marcel.
Thank you, Jens. Hello from the Netherlands. My name is Marcel Huskens. I am a previous auditor, a financial auditor, IT auditor, who long time, since 30 years, specialized on SAP. And I'm currently working for a company in the Netherlands, to ARC, from Singapore, access control, and the mark solutions that I am also distributing. So I am an expert on this topic, and thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to talk about the subjects for today.
Yeah, our pleasure, because I think you're a really great expert on that, and you have a lot of things to share. So let's have a look at the agenda. And Marcel, you've prepared a couple of slides and some content. What are we talking about today?
Yeah, so as you said, SAP authorizations and access violations is closely related to each other. So I first think I want to position SAP authorizations, how to put it in the internal controls framework. And obviously the listeners will have experience with a lot of challenges in SAP authorizations. I want to pick out a few of the common challenges and discuss it with you. And also tap on the maturity model, because everyone is in a different stage of getting to perfection on this topic. And that brings us to the topic of access violations. What is access violation? How do we to see it? And how it's all about risk. How can we substantiate the risk that's really something bad has happened? So, and then I think you take over, Jens, to explain what the REMQ application can do on that topic.
Yeah, happy to do that. And everyone, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out. We have an email address, labs@focuslabs.com. There will be a QA with Marcel at the end of the session also. All right, let's get started.
Yes. Yeah, so SAP authorizations. So if you look how to position it, you see here this little picture about the business internal controls framework. So it all starts with segregation of duties in the organization. You have different people responsible for different topics. And when you're using a big application like SAP, you want to make sure that these segregation of duties are also maintained in the access right in the system. So that's what we call user access controls. Of course, you also have your IT general controls. Is your whole infrastructure, is it safe? Is the segregation between development and production? Is the cyber threats, are they taken care of, and all that kind of thing? And of course, you have your SAP application controls, the number ranges, the loggings, everything what is there in SAP, and what can be configured and what is already native there. So yeah, and then how to position SAP authorization is really this one box about the user access controls. You see, what this picture wants to say is like, yes, SAP authorization is very important, but it's not the only thing. We also have some things around it. And yeah, so really the configuration of this user access control, that is all what we are doing in SAP authorizations with our users and our roles and everything like that.
Right, and we see user organization, which is the business, the line of business, I don't know, procurement or sales or HR or whatever it may be. And then we have IT, but we see that arrows go left and right. They have to work together, but who's ultimately responsible that things work out in a safe way?
Yes, so I always say ultimately it's the business responsible, because we are running a business, and in order to run the business, we need a system like SAP. And that system needs to be secure and or well controlled. And so ultimately, I would say it's a responsibility of the business. Of course, especially when it goes to the very technical heart, like in the IT general controls, you can say, well, we can delegate some decisions to the IT organization, but we shouldn't consider IT responsible for the whole topic of security and control. That's my opinion.
Yeah, actually, that's also kind of the legal take on it, right? I mean, there's
Yeah,
requirements on compliance and internal controls, and they make very clear that ultimately even senior management is responsible and
yeah,
has to make sure that through business, with the help of IT, you have proper controls in place,
yeah.
preventive and detective controls.
Yes, but it's always a balanced act. So of course, IT also needs to service the users, so they tend to give a bit more access, so that they have less complaints of people. Oh, I don't have access. But from a
Pragmatic.
risk perspective, you want to tighten down because if you give everybody all they ask for, then
Mhm.
you could also end up in some mistakes or maybe even fraud cases that can happen. So yeah,
Right. I mean, it's always a trade-off, right? Too much
yeah,
security is annoying and costly.
yeah.
Also, let's not forget about the
It's a
costs about that, and just makes the business slow. But too little security is also not a good idea.
it's a very thin line.
Yeah.
Yeah, and talking about common challenges, and I just listed a few that I frequently come across when visiting customers, talking to customers, and doing audits and doing consultancy work. See, as we just mentioned, business is responsible, but they find this SAP authorizations often too technical, so they cannot really get their hand on it. So there is a tendency to delegate it to IT, let IT solve it, and that's it. And that is what depends a bit on how the authorizations are configured, whether the authorization design helps to get business really understand. But normally, usually they say, "Oh, it's too technical. I really don't understand
Mhm.
what's going on." So not my party. Well, on a technical point, definitely you have this topic of this custom built functionality. Always, every SAP implementation has some custom built functionality. Yeah, that you have to do something extra on the technical things to make sure it's properly secured. Business definitely would not understand that, but that is something that the technical guys really need to take care of and need to properly arrange it. Um, yeah, the other thing is, I don't know whether it's the same experience that you have, Jens, on this custom functionality, but um, what I generally also see is that
Hmm.
there is no real tools, user-friendly tools for the business to monitor whether the authorizations are properly configured. And so there are dedicated tools in the market, but not always. The customer has taken the decision to buy it and to implement it and then to use it in a proper way. And sometimes they bought it and they implemented it, but they are not using it in a smart way. So they are chasing a lot of reports like false positives, which are not really risks, and I spend a lot of
Hmm.
time on it, on fixing it or to quote mitigate it. And the real risks, the real risks in the business are not monitored because it's not somehow not configured in the tool. So that's also something that I observe. And also, last but not least, and that's many times is the trigger point why customers are asking me to visit them and to talk how I can help them, is because their auditors are on their neck. They have uh, they're reporting control deficiencies. They're saying, "Hey guys, your SAP authorizations are not well controlled, so we cannot really trust the integrity of the financial recordings. So we have to do a lot of testing, extra testing work. We will give you a higher bill because we need to test a lot more in order to get the assurance that your financial recordings are okay, that we can
Hmm.
certify them." That is many times the trigger point that management says, "Hey guys, can we get someone in to help us getting rid of these audit remarks?"
Yeah.
But
And
in
just
conclusion, what is the challenge is that um, yeah, you have to come up with a set of rules and regulations, policies, procedures, how you want to deal with authorizations. But once you have defined it, you also must be able to implement it. And of course, you will monitor it, but you will never get a 100% assurance that everything is always applied, that no bad things, because that's what you want to do. You want to prevent that bad things are happening because of well, mistakes or excessive authorizations. You'll never be 100% sure, but that's the challenge. How can
right.
we get the percentage as high as possible?
Right, and I think it's an ongoing process as well, right? I mean, business is changing, the SAP system is changing,
Yeah,
and so you cannot really say now we achieved the goal and that's it. But it's never-ending story. And you have, as we discussed on the other slide before, you have different departments, IT and business and so on and so forth, involved, which means that continuous and always updated communication between different departments, and also a lot of documentation is required. I mean, you have this example, it says custom built SAP functionality. I mean, it's great if you build it, and it's great if you implement a control for that at that point in time. But then who still knows about that 2 years later, when maybe you don't use that anymore because you changed the business process and people forget about that, and then it's
yeah,
still there. You could use it, but maybe nobody remembers that it's still there. And
yeah,
so all this communication and documentation is a lot of, I guess, overload or load on all the teams, which is not very sexy. Yeah, writing
yeah.
documentation and keeping it up to date, but without that, probably it's difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, I experience that a lot when customers ask me, "Can you help us to embed the custom functionality in the rule book of GLC?"
Mm.
And my first question is, "Would you still have some documentation about it?" And the answer is always, "Not sure, not much documentation, and the guys who implemented it are a long time gone already."
Yeah. Now we have a problem.
Yeah, that's very common.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it also depends a lot about in which stage of the maturity you are. So this is a model of the GLC maturity that is launched by GLC 2020. So it's a generic topic about regulations and compliance with regulations. And what we projected it here is on SAP authorizations. You can imagine that when you're in the very early stage of the maturity, like the ad hoc stage, you can say, well, in the ad hoc stage, customers do not really realize that SAP authorization is really that important. So they have a lack of formalized rules for what we just discussed about how to deal with the authorizations. And so this is really an ad hoc response to issues that is in the early stage. And then when they grow a bit more in the maturity, then you see, then they come up with a set of rules. And then most rules stay on paper and other rules they manage to actually implement. So
Mm.
that's a fragmented implementation. The next stage is when the formalized rules are completely implemented, but the monitoring is done with all bits and pieces of ad hoc tooling, a bit unstructured, but at least it's managed, but with kind of unstructured tooling. And the next stage is that the tooling is more mature and it's really integrated, well integrated with the SAP core system, so that you have a really fully implemented set of rules, and then properly monitored with the tools that are properly integrated. And then the next dream come true stage is when that system has some predictive and some dynamic functionality, so that when there's changes in the SAP system, for example, which has impact on your access rules, that there's a sort of trigger that makes the update of rules possible, so that you are not chasing on old rules, that you are really chasing on risks and rules that are actual for your business. So that's a natural stage, and the natural flow, how companies can grow towards maturity. And I think the people who are listening in, they can think about their own situation, their own organization. Oh, where are we? Are we in stage 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? And of course, your
Interesting.
challenges will be very different depending on which stage that you are.
Yeah, do you think it's kind of a normal distribution there around, I don't know, stage 3 or something like that? Or do you see that many customers tend to be on the left or right side of this distribution here?
Oh, I think there's, I mean, you can see at the color of my hair that I have a long history of dealing with these matters. In the early stages, when I was involved in this, it was definitely more on the left side. I had to do a lot of talking to customers to convince them that really SAP authorizations is something important, that you must not think too easy about it. But in the later years, especially after SAP themselves came with the GRC access control solution, I think it was in 2007, 2006, 2007 timeframe. From that moment onwards, more customers got aware that they have to do something. Not necessarily with the SAP GRC tooling, there's other tools on the market as well, but at least to do something. So I see a shift to the right, definitely, yes. But I would not be surprised that there are still quite a few companies out there that are a bit on the left side.
Interesting. Although, I mean, SAP authorizations for a long time even has been kind of a synonym for SAP security, right? It was
Yeah.
more or less the main thing that you did. It was
Yes.
usually large consulting projects, and just, I don't know when exactly, and a little bit later then came all this additional stuff like authentication, single sign-on, encryption, and
Yeah.
secure system configuration, and ABAP code
Yes.
scanners and stuff that's
Yeah.
kind of new compared to authorizations, right?
Yeah, it has come with all the cybersecurity
Yeah.
threats and the hype around it as well. So and then SAP security is, and I remember that in many 10, 12 years ago already, the technical people were saying to me, hey, you're talking about SAP security, but you're just focusing on the authorizations in the application. There's a lot around it, and I always acknowledge that. And it's fair to say that if we talk about SAP security nowadays, we shouldn't really do it. We should talk about SAP authorizations when we are talking about the controls, the logical access control inside the application. And then we have
Right.
the worlds around it, which we can call under the more broader sense security. Yeah.
Right. And just
That's a
two
good point.
short external links regarding the whole look on what SAP security encompasses. Our last webinar, like 6 weeks ago, was with Alexander Zellner from SmarterSec. We also discussed the SAP security solution map, which gives a broader picture of what you have to do, even organization and processes. And the slide that you showed, GRC 2020, Michael Rasmussen, who has a broader view on GRC as such, but I think who invented even the term GRC, he was in our webinar last year, 6 months ago. You find it in our webinar archive.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so that brings us to how to define access violations, because we talked a bit about how to position SAP authorizations and all these challenges and the maturity model. And that's where, you see, we talk about rules and regulations for authorizations, and now we can define what is an access violation. So basically, an access violation is that we are not compliant with the rules and regulations that we have set. Or, well, you could say external parties can set it, but in principle, I would say management of your company is setting the rules and regulations, how we want to deal with SAP authorization. Of course, you want to listen to best practice, what is being done and what's being advised by auditors and other people. So if you are not playing according to these rules, that's what we call access violations. So let me give an example that makes it maybe more meaningful. An example of a very common best practice authorization rule is in segregation of duties, that we're saying that those people who are creating or changing the master data for vendors should not be the same persons who are also processing the invoice for these vendors. So, and of course, the rationale, why is it, people could say, oh, why is it a risk? Okay, to think about it, that means somebody could create a fictitious vendor and then say, oh, now I have a fictitious vendor in my SAP system, and now I can post a fictitious invoice as well. And if I'm lucky, it's getting paid to my bank account. So that is, in principle, the risk rationale about it. When we look at what is a violation, then we have to introduce two things: the can do and the did do. So a user who has the authorization, so the access right in SAP to actually create or change the vendor master, but he can also go into the transaction code to post vendor invoices. That would be a can-do violation. So from the term of access rights, it's a violation in the rules that says it should not be combined to one user. So that's the can-do violation. But of course, management will also be very interested in the did-do violation, because if somebody can do it, but hey, come on, guys, the agreement is we should not be doing it, right? So if everyone sticks to the agreement, then and did not use that functionality to do both sides of the equation, then still okay, there's no risk. So that's the did do violation. So yeah, if we want to check that on the next slide, we can give it a bit more substance to that. So what you do in S/4HANA, for example, or on ECC for that matter, you have to configure the authorizations. You have to build roles and you have to assign roles to users. So what the golden rule, what you're doing is saying that, well, I'm not going to put these two critical activities like create, change vendors and posting vendor invoices. I'm not going to combine that into one role and then assign that role to the user, because then how there you have the can-do violation is already there. So that is not a smart thing to do. So the first step that you definitely will do is make sure that your roles are designed properly, that you don't have these can-do violations already there on the role level. The next challenge will be, oh, now do I have sufficient users to assign the roles to different users? Sometimes user departments are too small, and we have no choice. We have separate roles, but we have no choice then to assign these two separate roles to one user, and that means that user still has the can-do violation. Now, if you are in a bit higher in the maturity curve that we just discussed, then you're probably running SAP GRC or maybe some other dedicated solution that can monitor, that can list those users who have the can-do violation, and then it gives an extra piece of information based on the so-called transaction usage in SAP. So it will look into the transaction usage statistics, whether the user has hit the transaction code for create change vendors, and also for posting vendor invoices. And I can then say, oh, this is high risk because this user actually used both sides of the equation. So that would then, from that perspective, be marked as, oh, it's a did do violation. And that's where we come to the topic of this webinar, to say, but wait a minute, can we be sure that there is a real risk? And actually, no, because the limitation that we have in our can do, did do so far is we can protect, or we can secure the access to create change vendor, but it wouldn't say which vendor. Mm-hmm. Same for the posting of invoices. You can give authorization to posting invoices, and maybe different type of invoices, but you cannot fine tune it on the level of the vendor. And what it's all about is that the risk is really there if somebody is posting an invoice for precisely the same vendor that he also just has created. That is the risk of the fictitious vendor that we just talked about. So how to find that? We don't find that in these did do violation analysis tools. We need additional tooling to get that done. And then ideally, if we have that tool to pick that up, it would then trigger a workflow saying that, somebody who is responsible saying, hey, here we have an invoice posting done by the same person who also created the vendor. Is that okay? Is there anything fishy going on with that? And then the circle is completely wrong. Then we have really substantiated the risk as we wanted.
Right. It's kind of introducing a 4 eyes principle after the fact, right? You present the cases, and then you have somebody review the event and approve or reject, or at least it's documented, whatever happened. And I mean, in order for that really to work, as you mentioned, you need to do it for the same vendor, so for the same business process, so to say, procuring something, paying one vendor, and not for different vendors. There was I think, Marcel, you know this also, there's this overview of this kind of monitoring, level 1 to level 4. Level 1 is can do, what you just presented. Yeah, you have the authorizations, and then you can look at the transaction code alone, if that is used. And finally, level 4, so to say, is a very fine granular monitoring of these activities based on a document level. So each invoice and each vendor master data compared, and they need to match. And that's kind of what also reduces the number of false positives, if you will. If you do monitoring on the transaction level, then you get a lot of noise that is completely irrelevant because there is no materialized risk. You cannot pay a vendor A, vendor B was created or something like that. Yeah, and I think that's where nice introduction, where the REMQ tool comes into play, where we have this functionality. The technical background can be quite complex because there is no coherent logging in SAP for who created a document or who created actually a business object and who changed it. Who created it is in a table, who changed it is in a change document. It can be a little bit messy, in particular if you want to do it manually. So in the tool that we created, this is taken care of. So it's kind of the part of the complexity is taken away from the user. It's buried in some ABAP code. And we see the example here. A user created a creditor and posted an invoice. It could also read, created an invoice for the same vendor. And in that case, you have a risk, and you can even say how big the risk is in euro, dollars, or whatever currency, because it's the face amount of the invoice. If that's a fake or fictitious a vendor that was created and invoice also, and it gets paid, then that's the amount of money that you actually lose. Yeah. And at the same time, you can here also introduce this after the fact digital 4-eyes principle. You detect that, somebody else reviews it, and can decide how to proceed. But we always use this simple example of creating a vendor and creating an invoice for the same vendor. But we look at the same next slide there. There is hundreds of these examples. I don't know how many of these SOD violations are in the standard access control SOD matrix, probably already there. Hundreds, a few dozen of them probably highlighted as high risk. Because if it directly leads to a payment, there's a higher risk if you just would be on a master data level, for instance, right? Not a payment created yet, but and what the tools here can do is like we can level these in various combinations of these business objects that SAP has, and a business object can be a financial document, a master data set, or something like that. And so like that, you can have a compensating control for all these risks, or let's say residual risks, that the authorization concept cannot manage on a can-do level because there is not enough people. There might be some sort of deficiencies in the authorization concept, but you can have monitoring in place and try to close the gap, so to say, after the fact happened. Yeah. So, Marcel, thank you very much for that great overview. I think there's
welcome.
I mean, the topic is never ending, and
we can talk a whole day about it.
we can, yeah. If there are questions from the audience, reach out by email on LinkedIn, or type in your questions for the QA session with Marcel, which is coming up right now.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for staying with us for the Q&A session. Hi, Marcel. Thanks to you for staying also.
Sure, no problem.
Before we move on, we thought it would be a good idea to have a look where we all stand with our security measures. And we prepared a little survey, a little poll, where we would like to have your opinion about it, just to see where everybody is at the moment. It's anonymous, so names won't be displayed. It's just about an internal feeling, and I'm going to be showing the results. I'm going to hit the poll straight away. Just give me a second. And the first question is going to be, is access violation a concern in your company? Is it a priority? Is it a concern? Is it something that you're worried about? You should see it on your screens now, so please feel free to select your answer. I'm going to leave it open for around 10 seconds. I remember you saying, Marcel, in the last session, that concern can be interpreted in 2 different ways. Can you repeat that for us here as well? Yeah. That was actually quite good.
Yeah. Yeah, so it doesn't mean to say that whether you have access, a problem with access violations. It means to say that you are monitoring the access violations. You want to know whether there's any access violations. In other words, that you spend time on it. Not saying whether you are in control of it or not. Whether is it a topic that you spend time on?
Is it a topic? Yeah. Let's see what the people said in this case. So it really sort of varies from region to region. I'm going to close it in 2 seconds. So if anyone wants to give an answer, please do so now. I'm closing, and I'm going to show you the results in a second.
Yeah.
And there you go. 82% say yes. What do you think in comparison? Is that sort of the same in all the regions? What's your experience on that, Marcel?
Yeah, I mean, the tricky part is no. If it's not a concern, people may have interpreted it as, oh, of course it's a concern, but we have it very well in control, so it's not a concern anymore. So that's how I see it. Maybe the 18%. I don't think, well, unless there are attendees who are still in the phase one of the maturity model. We come back to that maybe later. But these are blissful unaware. They say, "Oh, should I worry about it?" so, yeah, that can be there. But let's say across the world, pretty much there is awareness that access violations need to be monitored. Of course, traditionally more in the West and in the US and the UK, that's where it all started. So there's maybe it's more landed in a broader group of companies than towards compared to the East. But the East is catching up very quickly.
Yeah, I see. So let's actually talk about that maturity level where everyone sort of stands and where everyone sees themselves. The next question is, at what SAP authorization maturity level is your organization? I'm going to put it in there. So as you've seen, there are 5. Please feel free to pick yours. And then we see, so you expect the people to be somewhere around the middle, hardly anyone at 5 and hardly anyone at 1.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
If the majority would be in 4 or 5, I would be very surprised. That means that companies are catching up much quicker as I expected. But generally, if I look at the market, I'm still very active in the market. Then I think it will be still very much in the middle, or even a little bit below the middle. Let's say 2 and 3. That was in the first session scored the highest. So let's see what happens here.
Let's see what happens. I'm going to close the question now. And the majority of the attendees in this session actually comes from the DACH rooms from German-speaking countries, so Central of Europe, the way I see it from the names. But let's see. I'm showing you the results. So for all of our curiosity, here we go. I remember the last one, someone being at 5 and somebody being at 1 also, thinking, oh God, I'm completely naked with this. But here we're quite in the middle, and there is a fine 3 with 75%. What do you think?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that is I think, compared to the first session this morning, and I think the first session this morning is representing the east of the world.
Quite,
yeah. So there was a higher percentage in 2 and a lower percentage in 3. But the emphasis was on 3.
Yeah, this is quite the average now. Let's go to the next one. For some reason, the question is put in here double. Let me check that I get the right one. Let me try. Yeah, it's the right one. I'm going to start it. And you see the question is, do you use any of these tools? So the SAP Security Baseline Template, which contains basic authorization checks, SAP Access Controls, which often, at least in some regions, is the most frequently used one. The VOQUZ Labs REMQ might be unknown to some, or Pathlock. None at all, or others, because as there are quite a lot of tools out there.
Oh yeah, that has emerged in the past 10, 12 years. A lot of other vendors came into the picture and give comparable solutions, and they are quite popular as well. So I expect quite a high percentage, maybe people saying other tools. We have other tools than these. We don't necessarily run SAP access controls, or VOQUZ Labs is maybe not yet known so well across the world. I'm not sure, but Padlock also maybe not. There are other vendors who were integrated into Padlock, like CSI, the company that I initially came from, and Security Weaver. These are another tool. So yeah, so anyway, I think expect a high percentage.
Let me show, so we don't have to guess. So let's see. I'm going to I probably won't surprise you with the actual results. Let me show it to you.
Wow.
There is none at all, which might be worrying. Actually, it's the other is quite accurate to what you said, and people are catching up on Labs REMQ as well as on Padlock. So, what surprises me, there is no SAP using this one, while SAP access controls was the most dominant one in the first session, if you remember.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
That's interesting. Yeah, so maybe, but what I observe many times is that when companies make a new deal with SAP, then SAP actually sort of puts the GRC, the access control solution in it, but not necessarily companies are very keen on it immediately implementing it. Maybe they already have something in place which is satisfying their needs, and it can be quite a big effort to implement the SAP access control solution. But 0%, that's really, I didn't expect that. I would at least have expected 15 or 20%. That's interesting.
See, sometimes it's good to ask rather than to assume, so we know where we stand. I think this is not a representative one. We're talking to approximately about 100 people, so obviously that's not a representative questionnaire, but it still says something about where we all stand. And coming from there, I'd like to jump to the question. So just a reminder for you guys, if you want to ask some questions, obviously feel free to use the chat here. Names won't be read. If you don't feel comfortable asking here or have an idea after the webinar, please feel to shoot at labs@VOQUZlabs.com. We're going to distribute the question either to Marcel or to Jens. And I'm jumping into the ones that came in already. And this is quite actually interesting, or it might be even considered as provocative. It says, our auditors advise us to implement GRC access control. Is it really required? So it's a classic question. We're saying, do we really need this? Is just paranoia, or do we really need this?
Yeah. Well, I think you need to take the word of your auditor serious. I mean, the auditor would not just recommend it. If everything is fine, the auditor should not be biased, saying and should not be promoting any products that. I mean, I've been an auditor working in an external audit firm myself for over almost 20 years. And I remember the culture is very much don't favor any vendor. Be independent, be impartial. So if your auditor is advising a solution, then you need to take it serious. But of course, the question is, must it be the SAP solution? It all depends on how big is the risk, how big is your SAP system, how much business are you doing with your SAP system. If it's huge, then there might be a good business case to implement SAP access control. If the risks are, I mean, many companies have their biggest risks managed in other systems, not necessarily an SAP system. Of course, the financial system is SAP, but if these risks can be managed with a more simple solution, then it should also be fine. So you shouldn't literally always follow what the auditor says, but you should definitely take it serious. Yes.
Talking about the maturity level, I have another one here which I found quite interesting. It's especially looking at the poll that we had early on. We are in stage 3 of the maturity model, and we are happy with it. Is this bad in your opinion?
No, that's not necessarily bad. It's pretty much what I just also mentioned about this recommendation from the auditors. It's all about what part of your business is really depending on your SAP system, or is the risk really in your SAP system? If let's say if that is moderate, not so much, then why would you need to have a brilliant integrated solution that has predictive possibilities if the topic is not that hot for your organization? So depending on the situation, as typically consultants answer, of course, depending on the situation, but it is absolutely true that it is per situation it is different, which should be the maturity level that you should target. Yeah, and maybe 3 is fine.
You talking about depending on the situation, the classic advisor's answer to everything. This actually suits the next question, and it says, What is your recommended setup for a team working on cleaning up on authorization concept? So I'm not talking about what teams should be working on it internally. So, but what are the actual steps? How would you tackle that? What's your experience from your projects?
Yeah, so my experience is that you first need to have an agreement on the rules and regulations, what we just also talked about in the webinar. Many companies, they are, well, maybe lazy, or they say, oh, why we need to think about it? Isn't there a best practice or a common practice? And they take that as a rule. And that is a bit dangerous. Of course, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can definitely leverage the best practice and say, oh, let me see if that applies for us as well. But exactly that kind of thinking, what is applicable to us and what is our priority? You also need to prioritize. I mean, if the best practice comes with a set of 200 potential access risks, not all 200 will be applicable to you, and maybe not, let's say only 100 are applicable to you, and from the 100 they are not equally important. You can make let's say, this is my top 10, this is my top 50, and then I would say get clean with the top 10 or top 50. Don't try to overeat yourself, try to do everything, but let's first get clean for the top priority risks, and then set the standard for staying clean. So in order to stay clean after you finish your project, and it can take a couple of months, it's not something that you can do overnight, so it definitely will take a lot of effort. But the one thing that you want to make sure is that after you have completed all that effort and you consider yourself in a clean state, you don't want to end up in a situation next year you have to start all over again, because all the new access requests that came in and all the changes in your organization and your business have resulted in another state of incompliance. So you want to make sure that you put the measures in place to stay clean, to keep the matter in control. And that requires a combined effort of the technical people, the people who know the technical SAP security implementation, authorization implementation, I should say, but also people from the business side who know how business is supported with the SAP system, because that's where the risk priority comes from.
But you just said it yourself. So when departments, let's call it that way, departments should talk to each other, and obviously if you're working on that side, if your main job is evolving around SAP authorizations and access violations, and you know what you're talking about, so you don't have to convince each other in between colleagues from that department. But what to say to somebody who's not sort of involved on a regular basis and who says, well, this feels like some sort of audit, we need to get it over and done with. It's not something that we can drive business from. It's just something we need to sort of, check it off and be happy that it's done. What do you say to someone who asks you, I mean, come on, do we really need this?
Yeah, I understand that people think that, because if you're running a business, you're creating a product and you're selling a product. Those who create a product want to make sure that the quality of the product is as good as possible, and the people who are selling it, they want to make sure that as good profit is made. That is where the people are working for. And then there's some guy coming and saying, oh, but wait a minute, you are using all this you're using the SAP system to process all that information, and then there's risk in it because this can happen, that can happen. See, the thing is, you want to prevent bad things from happening. But of course, it is possible that if you didn't take the security or the proper authorization measures that we are discussing here, it's still possible that nothing bad happens. So I say, oh, see, I could have saved all that time and still nothing happened. But that's my experience. And those rare, well, luckily it's rare cases that really bad things happen. I mean, small things always happen, and you want to avoid them as well. But if really a huge fraud happens, or a huge disruption of business, which I in my career also one time experienced, that because of the excessive access rights, some junior person that was assigned to the SAP all role just pressed the wrong button in a screen, and because of this unlimited authorizations, there was nothing to stop that process that he launched unintentionally, and it basically brought the whole system down. And this particular company on a Friday afternoon had to restore the backup from Thursday, and everybody on Monday came to work and said, well, pretend it's Friday morning, everything what you did on Friday you have to redo because we lost the data. And that in a system of 1,000 users is not, it's a serious incident that was hugely escalated. It was even escalated to SAP. First, the customer blamed on SAP, because how can your system not prevent us from doing this? Then SAP, of course, obviously would say, yeah, but hey, we are delivering the system with an authorization system, so you make sure that you implement it. We used a consulting company for that, so we blame it on the consulting company. So yeah, that was, and then suddenly everyone, no one is complaining about this boring stuff that auditors are requiring. Then yes, of course we should do this, because then they have seen what can happen if you don't do it.
But if you don't mind that comparison, that actually always makes me think of buying insurance. You know, you can overbuy everything and be very paranoid about everything, and then you can have nothing and then be surprised about something happening and then say, why didn't I do so? And it's probably somewhere that, you know, the answer is somewhere in the middle, as we always say. So it's what you stated before. I interpret the way you said it. Make sure you think about the real threats, not like being paranoid and locking everything up so nobody can make a move. But having a right, what would be the worst that can happen to me and my company, and how to secure that. That's how I understand you. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's easy to if you let let's say the auditors control your system, then they may overdo it. You know.
Okay, great. Let me check.
It's the thin line. It's the thin line that we're trying to walk.
Yeah. Agree. Let me check. So there's a bit of multitasking, looking at the emails and the chat function here. I don't see any more questions coming in. Marcel, thanks for clearing out some questions. If any more questions occur, as I said, please contact us via labs@VOQUZlabs.com or via LinkedIn if that's your preferred way of communication. And if you have specific questions to Marcel, still ping us at labs@VOQUZlabs.com, and we're going to share those questions with him. Other than that, thanks for joining. Thanks for your patience, and see you in the next webinar. Marcel, thanks very much.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.